The sting of his hand across my face burned less than his words. "Stop pretending to be sick. No daughter of mine is this weak." My father's voice boomed through our living room as I steadied myself against the wall, the room spinning around me. "My name is Olivia, and at 22, I've been dealing with unexplained dizzy spells for the past 6 months. They would hit without warning, during dinner, at work, even while sleeping. The world would start spinning and I feel like I was falling through space, desperate to grab onto something solid. But in my father's eyes, this was just another attempt to get attention, to avoid responsibilities, to embarrass him. "Dad, please," I whispered, my vision blurring as another wave of dizziness hit. "Something's really wrong. I need to see a specialist." "The only thing wrong here is your attitude." He grabbed my shoulders, forcing me to look at him. "First you quit your job at the firm, then you start with these dizzy spells. I didn't raise you to be this pathetic." My mother stood in the corner, wringing her hands but saying nothing. She never did when Dad got like this. My younger sister Amy watched from the stairs, her face a mixture of pity and embarrassment. The room tilted again, and I felt my knees buckle. As I reached for the wall to steady myself, my father's hand struck my face again, harder this time. "Get up," he demanded. "Stop this nonsense right now." But I couldn't. The world was spinning too fast, and darkness was creeping in at the edges of my vision. The last thing I heard before everything went black was Amy's scream. I woke up in the emergency room, the harsh fluorescent lights making my head pound. Amy sat beside my bed, her eyes red from crying. "You had a seizure," she said quietly. Dad, he didn't know what to do. He just stood there while Mom called 911. The ER doctor ordered a series of tests, including an MRI. When she mentioned the word tumor, I saw my father's face go pale for the first time in my life. But he quickly composed himself, insisting it was probably just stress or anxiety. "She's always been dramatic," he told the doctor, not even looking at me. "Gets it from her mother's side." The doctor's expression remained neutral, but her eyes were kind as she looked at me. "We'll know more after the scan," she said firmly. "This isn't something we should dismiss." As they wheeled me away for the MRI, I caught a glimpse of my father in the waiting room. He sat rigidly in his chair, staring straight ahead, his jaw clenched. This wasn't part of his plan for me. In his world, success meant working at his law firm, marrying the right person, maintaining the family image. Illness didn't fit into that picture. The MRI machine hummed and clicked around me as I lay perfectly still, tears sliding silently down my temples. I thought about all the times I tried to tell him something was wrong. The morning meetings I'd missed because I couldn't stand without falling. The dinners where I'd grip the table until my knuckles turned white, trying to keep the room from spinning. Each time, his response had been the same: accusations of weakness, demands to toughen up, and lately physical punishment. He'd shaped his expectations of me like iron bars, and when I couldn't meet them, he'd decided force was the answer. After the scan, I was returned to my room to wait for the results. Amy held my hand while her parents sat on opposite sides of the room, Mom fidgeting nervously, Dad still maintaining his stoic facade. When the doctor returned, her expression made my heart sink. She held up several images of my brain, pointing to a mass that shouldn't have been there. "It's called an acoustic neuroma," she explained. "A benign tumor that's pressing on your vestibular nerve. It's affecting your balance, causing the dizzy spells, and based on these images, it's been growing for some time." The silence in the room was deafening. I looked at my father, who had gone completely still, his face ashen. The iron facade was cracking, revealing something I'd never seen before: fear. "This," he started, his voice barely a whisper, "this is real." The doctor's voice was firm. "Very real and potentially dangerous if left untreated. Your daughter wasn't faking anything, Mr. Walker. She needs surgery, and soon." I watched as the truth hit him like a physical blow. Every accusation, every harsh word, every slap, all came crashing down on him at once. He looked at me, really looked at me, for what felt like the first time in months. The doctor continued explaining the treatment plan, but I barely heard her. I was focused on my father, who had sunk into his chair, his head in his hands. The man who had never shown weakness, who had demanded perfection, who had dismissed my pain as dramatics, was crumbling before my eyes. Little did he know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would change our family forever. The days following my diagnosis were filled with a heavy, uncomfortable silence. My father, The man who always had something to say, who ruled our house with iron authority, could barely look at me. The bruise from his slap had faded, but the memory remained sharp and clear. The surgery was scheduled for 2 weeks out. As I sat in various pre-op appointments, my mother hovered nervously while my father stood in corners, a shadow of his former self. The confident lawyer who could command any room was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. One evening, as I sat on our back porch trying to manage another wave of dizziness, Amy brought me some tea and sat beside me. "Dad's been crying," she whispered, as if sharing a state secret. "I heard him in his study last night. He was looking at your old photos from when we were kids." I didn't know how to respond to that. The idea of my father crying seemed as impossible as the sun rising in the west. This was the man who told me tears were a sign of weakness, who'd made me run laps around the house when I cried after falling off my bike at age 8. The next morning, I found a stack of papers on my bedside table. Printouts about acoustic neuromas, treatment options, recovery statistics. They were covered in my father's familiar highlighting and margin notes, his lawyer's habit of thoroughness now focused on understanding what was happening to me. 3 days before the surgery, he finally spoke to me directly. I was in the kitchen, gripping the counter as another spell hit me when he walked in. "Olivia." His voice was different, softer than I'd ever heard it. "Let me help you to the couch." I wanted to refuse, to show him I could manage on my own just as he'd always demanded, but the room was spinning too badly. His hand on my elbow was gentle, nothing like the harsh grip I'd grown used to. Once I was seated, he didn't leave. Instead, he sat in the armchair across from me, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I've been speaking with Dr. Matthews," he said, referring to my neurosurgeon. "She explained how much pain you must have been in these past months." I watched him struggle with the words, this man who could argue cases before the state Supreme Court but couldn't find the right way to talk to his own daughter. "When you were born," he continued, his voice rough, "I promised myself I'd make you strong. The world is hard, and I thought I was preparing you for it. Instead, He couldn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. We both knew what he'd done, how he'd taken my genuine suffering and turned it into a reason to punish me, to prove his point about strength and weakness. "The day you collapsed," he said, "when they took you away in the ambulance. I've never been more scared in my life. Not because you were sick, but because I realized what I'd done. I'd become the very thing I wanted to protect you from." Tears were sliding down his cheeks now, something I'd never seen before. My father, the unshakable pillar of strength and authority, was breaking down in front of me. "I hit you," his voice cracked. "You were sick, truly sick, and I hit you. What kind of father does that?" I wanted to stay angry, to hold on to the hurt and betrayal of the past months, but seeing him like this, vulnerable, horrified by his own actions, stirred something else in me. "A father who was wrong," I said quietly, "and who needs to do better." He nodded, wiping roughly at his face. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, Olivia. But I promise you, things will be different. I'll be different." Before either of us could say more, another dizzy spell hit me. This time, instead of demanding I tough it out, my father was beside me in an instant, supporting me until it passed. His hand on my shoulder was steady, patient. "I've got you," he whispered. "I've got you now." That evening, he called a family meeting. In front of Mom and Amy, he did something else I'd never seen. He'd apologized. He acknowledged his mistakes, his cruelty, his failure to listen and protect. Mom cried, Amy looked shocked, and I felt something shift in our family's foundation. As I went to bed that night, still processing everything that had happened, I realized that sometimes it takes a crisis to break down the walls we build around ourselves. My father's iron exterior had finally cracked, revealing something I'd never seen before. A chance for change, for healing, for a different kind of strength. Tomorrow, we would begin preparing for my surgery. But tonight, for the first time in months, I wasn't facing my fears alone. The morning of my surgery arrived with a pale dawn. As the nurses prepared me for the operation, my father never left my side. His hand gripped mine, not with the harsh pressure I'd known before, but with a gentle steadiness that spoke of his fear and regret. "We'll be right here when you wake up," he promised as they wheeled me toward the operating room. The last thing I saw before the anesthesia took hold was his face, stripped of all its usual stern authority, showing nothing but love and worry. The surgery took 6 hours. Later, Amy told me how our father had paced the waiting room the entire time, stopping only when Mom insisted he eat something. Every time the operating room doors opened, he'd freeze, waiting for news. When Dr. Matthews finally emerged to tell them the surgery was successful, my father, the man who built his reputation on always being in control, broke down completely. Right there in the waiting room, in front of strangers, he sobbed with relief. Recovery was a long road. The first few days were a blur of pain medication and disorientation. But through it all, I noticed the change in my father. He took 3 weeks off work, something unprecedented in his 30-year career. He learned from the nurses how to help me sit up, how to manage my medication schedule, how to assist with the exercises that would help me regain my balance. One afternoon, about a week after I'd returned home, I overheard him on the phone with his law partner. "No, I won't be in this week either," he said firmly. "My daughter needs me. The firm will survive without me. Yes, I realize the Anderson case is important, but not as important as this. Transfer it to Mitchell if you need to." The man who had once prioritized work over everything, who had sent me to school with a fever because walkers don't take sick days, was choosing me over his precious firm. The dizzy spells gradually decreased as I healed, but my father's attentiveness didn't. He kept a detailed log of my recovery, celebrated every small victory, and never once suggested I was being dramatic or weak when I needed to rest. 1 month after the surgery, during a follow-up appointment, Dr. Matthews showed us the new scan. The tumor was gone, and my brain was healing well. As she pointed out the changes on the images, I felt my father's hand tighten around mine. "I have to say," Dr. Matthews added, looking at my father, "I've seen a remarkable change in your family dynamics since our first meeting. Sometimes illness can be a harsh teacher, but it seems you've learned its lessons well." That evening, as we sat on the back porch, my new favorite spot for our daily talks, my father turned to me with serious eyes. "I've been thinking about the firm," he said, "about how I spent my life chasing success, pushing everyone around me to do the same. I think it's time for a change." He explained his plan to step back from full-time work, to train younger partners to take over more cases. "Life's too short to miss what's really important," he said. I almost learned that too late. 6 months after the surgery, our family gathered for dinner to celebrate my full recovery. The dizzy spells were gone, and I'd started a new job. Not at my father's firm, but at a nonprofit arts organization. To everyone's surprise, he was my biggest supporter in this decision. To Olivia, he raised his glass, his voice thick with emotion, who taught me that true strength isn't about never showing weakness, but about having the courage to face our challenges and accept help when we need it. Looking around the table, I saw how much had changed. Mom was smiling more freely, no longer walking on eggshells. Amy was openly sharing her opinions, something she'd never dared do before. And my father, the man whose approval I'd spent my whole life chasing, was finally someone I could talk to, laugh with, and lean on. And to second chances, I added, raising my own glass. Because sometimes the worst moments in our lives can lead us to better ones. The tumor that had caused so much pain had also broken down walls we'd lived behind for years. My father's slap, that moment of cruelty born from ignorance and pride, had become the catalyst for profound change. As we finished our dinner, I watched my father laugh at one of Amy's jokes, his face relaxed and genuine. The Iron Man was gone, replaced by someone more human, more real, and infinitely more lovable. Sometimes healing comes in unexpected ways, and the lessons we learn through pain can lead to the greatest growth. Our family story wasn't just about a medical crisis, it was about breaking down old patterns, finding new ways to love each other, and discovering that true strength often looks very different from what we imagine.